If you cannot complete that full range of motion, you are not completing the task, therefore you're not doing what you've said you would do, which is a glute bridge. You're partial repping, which is essentially in this case ego lifting, and that's not good for you. Today we're going to be talking about two things: bottoms and misinformation. And that largely stems from this video, which is how to double your glute size without lifting heavy. And I've got a few concerns about the title alone, and potentially even the contents of the video, which we'll get to in a moment. But before we do that, I'm going to ask one thing, is if throughout this video at any point you actually learn something from the video, I'd appreciate, again, only if you learn something from the video, that you consider clicking the button down below to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even leave me a comment to tell me that you don't hate me, because I probably need the reassurance in my life.
I want you to actually watch exactly what I'm doing and why it's wrong to actually put so much weight and push for so much weight when something happens. So watch me right now.
Straight off the bat, there's a difference between lifting heavy and ego lifting. Lifting heavy, again, strength is relative, so heavy for you might be different to heavy for me, is largely going to come down to lifting as much weight as you can within a respective rep range to a respective intensity level, being reps in reserve or RPE. So 1 left in the tank, 2 left in the tank, something like that. Ego lifting is lifting more than you're capable of lifting. That's a big difference. Yes, 100% you should lift heavy if you're looking to build muscle. Again, depends how you define heavy. But no, you should not ego lift, because now you are not performing the task. So if the task here is doing a glute bridge, so take it from that bottom position all the way up to full contraction and then back down again. If that is the task, if you cannot complete that full range of motion, you are not completing the task, therefore you're not doing what you've said you would do, which is a glute bridge. You're partial repping, which is essentially in this case ego lifting, and that's not good for you. The hip thrust itself is a fantastic movement, one of my favorite movements of the glutes. Do you need hip thrust to build big glutes? No, you don't, but I'm a big fan of including a thrust pattern like a glute bridge, hip thrust, or maybe even a back extension. The thing I've mentioned before is using this band situation helps with a bit of external rotation of the knees, but in reality you don't need to do that. And this whole pulsing, thrusting, top portion thing, sure, it's probably going to burn a lot and hurt a lot, but it doesn't necessarily make it a more effective movement.
At the beginning, you might be doing your squats just until here, right? So it's not still quite parallel as you're a beginner, but keeping the same weight, for example, over time, your range of motion might improve and you might reach parallel and so on. So this is also known as progressive overload.
That's not actually true. There are only really two forms of progressive overload. And my belief and my understanding is this, is essentially progressive overload is a tool that is essentially used to maintain mechanical tension. If you are going through a greater range of motion or improving your form or slowing down the tempo, that is not progressive overload. That's actually just lifting with better form, to be honest. Big difference. Progressive overload can be isolated to one of two things: more weight, more reps. Either of those two things, or a mixture of both potentially, is a form of progressive overload. Slower tempo, less rest, better form, these are not forms of progressive overload. So again, that statement is incorrect in that sense.
If we want to add another weight, normally people, what do? They add like 5 or another 10, right? They will do a rep and they will struggle, because why? They already went from 40 kilo to 50 kilos here, which is a huge jump. Sometimes if you're ready to do this, then it's fine, but there is other better ways as well that you can build your strength gradually without having to increase or jump weight so quickly. And for this reason, we have...
Actually, I really support that. I think it's a really good point made there. A lot of people do always go for those big jumps, but if you go from 40 kilos to 50 kilos, that's a 25% jump. Imagine assuming your strength is increased by 25% in a week. Probably not going to happen. I'm a big fan of micro progressions. Chuck on a small weight, as she is indicating here, like a 1.25 for example. Every week if you can, do that. You're probably going to reduce the likelihood of a plateau, and your gains are probably going to be a bit more sustainable. What I would say though is don't expect to progressively overload every week. Every week would be fantastic, but for some people it might be every other week. For some people it might even be every 3 or 4 weeks. External variables come into play, stress, recovery and whatnot, but also how long you've been training comes into play as well. If you're more advanced, progressive overload might take a little bit longer to achieve. But honestly, that was actually a really good tip, and I like that because not many people speak about that. So I think the back squat is fine. It's absolutely great movement. Let's have a look at the range of motion. This is going to dictate a lot. No, that's actually valid. That's actually a fair squat. It depends why you're squatting. If you're squatting kind of primarily for the glutes, you would look at essentially reducing knee flexion and maybe only going to like 90 degrees or so, which is when the glutes are at their most lengthened position. If you're squatting for the quads, you look at increasing knee flexion and trying to make sure the knees travel as far as possible and go as low as possible in doing so. And if you're squatting for powerlifting purposes, you just need to make sure that the hip crease creases below the top of your knee. So it really depends why you're squatting, and your form should essentially align with what you're trying to achieve. Glute bias leg press would essentially be a leg press in which your feet are high and narrow, like they are here. A unilateral glute bias leg press would be the same thing, but with one leg at a time. Fantastic movement, fair range of motion. That's pretty bloody solid. Great movement to include, because if you look at the workout so far, you've got a thrust pattern, which I love, a squat pattern, which I love, a single leg pattern, which I love. So far, you're ticking 3 bloody good boxes. Although the information may not necessarily align with my thoughts and beliefs and opinions exactly, the movement selection or the basic principle surrounding the movement selection so far has actually been really good. What I would also say is Technogym. I don't like Technogym. Honestly, I'm going to cry about something now. 2 of my least favorite gym equipment brands, Technogym and Matrix. Honestly, I'm sorry if your gym has Technogym and Matrix. Sure, it's fine. You make do with what you got. But personally, most of the machines, not all of them, but most of them, I just don't like. I don't like how they're set up. I don't like how you fit into them. I don't like the resistance profile of most of them. It's all a bloody mess. I don't like how they move. They're just not very well made. So again, some are pretty good, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them are pretty crap. Quick pause. Remember, as always, linked down below in the description, you'll find the link to apply to work with myself on a one-to-one coaching basis online, where I can help you achieve your goals, whatever they may be and wherever you might be. You've also got the link to join the TFNL group coaching program, where you can follow a workout that is either for home use or gym use, and it's less than $1 a day, which is pretty bloody good. And you've also got the link to download one of the TFNL workout guides, which are pretty comprehensive, but also easy to understand workout guides that will teach you exactly what to do when it comes to training, probably give you a fair bit of information surrounding about what to eat as well, and also tell you exactly why you should or shouldn't be doing something, which to me is a pretty bloody good deal, especially considering how cheap they are. So again, they're all linked down below in the description. Have a gander if any of those things tickle your pickle.
I don't ever push for like super heavy, okay? We want to keep it moderate, okay? But going super heavy on this exercise is actually pointless, okay? We want to work more on repetition for this.
Again, I don't align with that. Essentially, heavy is very subjective, and heavy is also dependent on your definition of heavy. If I say do 20 kilos, you might say that's really heavy for a glute kickback, but you say, oh, that's not very heavy for a squat, but the weight's the same. So again, define heavy and in what context. Essentially, in my eyes, you should go as heavy as you need to go to meet the desired rep range at the desired intensity. And if you're training to, if not close to failure, that's going to be heavy for you. And she mentioned the point there about how this is a movement you should go for reps on. Most of my movements, regardless of what they are usually between 5 and 10 reps. If I'm doing an isolation, maybe like this, just because it might be a bit harder to progressively overload with weight, as the jumps might be a bit bigger and a bit more drastic, or it might result in a bit more joint loading, which I might have a niggle that is preventing, or just out of preference, I might go from, let's say, instead of 5 to 10, I might go from 8 to 10, I might go from 8 to 12, maybe even 8 to 15, depending. The movement shouldn't necessarily dictate the rep range, because again, 5 reps at this movement versus 30 reps at this movement will achieve the same stimulus, provided the intensity is the same, but sometimes you might just find it a bit more comfortable doing slightly higher reps due to technical considerations, or maybe even just preference. So again, I don't think this is a movement you should necessarily just do higher reps on, but you can do if you want, as you could also do lower reps on it too if you wanted to. The thing with kickback variation, I used to give them a lot of crap. I actually think they have a time and a place now. What I would say is like my preferred kickback is one where you kind of kick out slightly at an angle to make it a bit more of a glute med kickback, as the glute med is a muscle of the glutes that's commonly neglected during a lot of the previous patterns we've seen, whereas if we can kick slightly out, we can give it a bit of TLC that it probably needs. But to be honest, if you actually look at the general patterns she's done, being a squat pattern, a hip thrust pattern, a single leg press pattern, and a glute med kickback pattern, I actually really back. I think there's fantastic movement. The only thing you can maybe argue there, or maybe implement as well, is a hip hinge pattern. But again, you don't actually need to. That's more just because the hamstrings have been quite heavily neglected throughout this workout, whereas the quads have had a fair bit of love through the leg press and the squat. Or you could do a seated leg curl variation if you're looking at just really isolating the hamstrings and removing the glutes entirely. But honestly, it's actually not bad. Technically, a few things to adjust and address, but as a whole, it was fair enough. Movement selection, pretty fair enough as well. Information, I'm going to say it's a bit outdated and doesn't align with my personal opinions and beliefs. But again, just like with all my videos, these are just my opinions and my beliefs. Doesn't mean they need to be yours. Trial and error. Try things, research things, gather your own information, form your own opinion based on what she is saying and based on what I am saying. But again, until the next one, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my waffle about progressive overload. And thank you for tolerating the video.